Because there's similarities between both of them. So even the persecution of the Jews near the end times, surrounded by the Gentiles, theoretically that's happening now, or it will happen in the future also. In other words, Israel may have a lot of enemies near the end times. But anyways, our Lord is warning his faithful followers. And in fact, when it came to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the Christians, knowing these prophecies of our Lord, when they saw that Jerusalem was being surrounded by the Roman armies, they fled. So they saved their lives, whereas the Jews remained to fight, and over 1 million Jews were killed. There's historical evidence for that, and many of them were taken away into captivity, as mentioned. So our Lord is warning the faithful, warning them to be prepared, but also warning them not to be afraid of what's going to happen near the end. Notice how our Lord says, now when you see these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. In other words, don't have your heads down. Don't be discouraged or downcast or fearful, but hold your heads high. Be proud of your Christian faith and persevere and be willing to face whatever comes. Don't be afraid. And this element of fear is very important, because when people are afraid, we can't think straight when we're afraid. We kind of go into panic mode, kind of like where we're afraid, we feel threatened, and so we just want to do what we can to preserve our life or to save our life. And very often people will just do what they're told, or they will just go along with the crowd. I mean, think of COVID. I mean, people were so afraid, right? So what did they do? They just trusted the authorities, just take these vaccines and everything will be okay. Well, or the lockdowns, and everybody just complied. Not everybody, but the majority of people, because of great fear, right? So fear can be used sometimes to manipulate people, also to get them to be afraid, whether it's global warming, or in the past they talked about running out of oil, or that there's an ice age coming, and the ozone layer is disappearing, and all these things to get people to be afraid, just to trust the government and do whatever they tell you, right? So fear can be used against us, and that's not good. Now, in today's first reading from the book of Daniel, we have this account of Daniel thrown into the lion's den, and it's a beautiful narrative. It's a wonderful historical event, and it's very inspirational because Daniel was very faithful to God. The reason he's being attacked is because he prayed 3 times a day. He's praying to God. Now imagine if it was you who was threatened and you're going to be thrown into the lion's den. Imagine yourself being let down into the lion's den. What would you feel? You might feel great fear, right? But you shouldn't. So in other words, if this is your fate, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, just trust in God, which is what Daniel did. So yes, the angel of God comes and saves Daniel. But it's interesting that this account of Daniel in the lion's den is not the only historical account of someone being saved from the lions or from the beasts. So when the persecution of Christians was well underway, one of the things that they did to Christians is they would put them into the arena, the crowds all around the arena and the spectators, and they watch as the lions and other wild animals are let loose, and they watch these Christians running for their life and being torn apart by the wild beasts. But there were instances where the Christians, some of them, they would just be still and they would pray. And the lions or whatever wild animals would rush towards them, and all of a sudden they would just stop. And they wouldn't attack these Christians. So was it because they were praying? Well, part of it, they were being protected by God, yes, but they were also not afraid. And it's interesting because animals can sense fear. And it's kind of to their advantage when they sense fear because they know they have the upper hand, so they're more likely to attack. So these Christians were totally resigned to their fate. Okay, I'm going to be torn apart by the wild beasts or the lions or whatever, but that's okay. I'm just going to pray to God. I'm even going to close my eyes. I trust completely in God. Now, you and I, we may not be thrown into the lion's den or be torn apart by beasts, but we don't know what the future holds. And very often there's things that happen and we're afraid. And it's important that we recognize that fear and try to dispel it. In other words, trust in God no matter what happens, even if you were to be thrown into a lion's den. Now, this imagery of Daniel in the lion's den, I heard on the platform from Tim Gray, and he says, for the early Christians, this image of Daniel in the lion's den was a symbol, or the story reminded them to have great courage, to have no fear. But you see, there's also a spiritual component to this account of Daniel in the lion's den. And that spiritual account is that the lions in some way represent or can represent the evil spirits. In fact, in the first letter of St. Peter, chapter 5, I believe it's verse 8, St. Peter makes the statement, "Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And how does he devour us? Partially by getting us to sin. But think of this roaring lion. What are we going to, if we experience this roaring lion, our natural reaction for most people is fear. The devil wants us to be afraid. So he may not get us to commit to mortal sin or to commit a mortal sin, but he can sometimes get us to experience fear. And the evil spirits can and do control our passions, our emotions. So they can cause us to feel lazy. They can cause us to feel, lustful, for example, right? But they can also cause us to feel fear. And we need to overcome that fear. So not just the devil, but the evil spirits, all the evil spirits, right? They want to attack us. So it's kind of like, should we be afraid of that? And the answer is no. And when you notice, like I said, if you are fearful, dispel that. Make an act of trust in God. Dispel that spirit of fear, that spirit of negativity or discouragement or whatever it may be. In the name of Jesus, ask God to, get this spirit of laziness away from me, this spirit of lust or the spirit of anger or resentment or whatever it may be, spirit of pride. And trust in God. In humility, submit to the will of God, even if you are to be devoured by lions. Don't be afraid. Just a couple of announcements. We have a funeral today at 10:30 for Francis Thomas. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. And also a reminder that we have our Advent reflection this Saturday at 10:30 a.m. in the Parish Hall. It's organized by the CWL. Light refreshments will be available. Father Marcin Serwin will be giving the reflection, an Advent reflection, so take advantage of this opportunity to grow in your spiritual knowledge and to have kind of a spiritual day of greater reflection on the events leading up to the birth of Christ.